Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about a true global icon. But we're not talking about the superstar you see on billboards, no. We're talking about the person who was forged in fire. There's this myth that the greatest athletes are just born that way, that it's all destiny. Well, for Cristiano Ronaldo, that just wasn't the case. Not even close. He wasn't born a legend. He was made. So the big question is, how? How does a kid from a small, poor island turn himself into one of the most famous athletes in the history of the world? That's what we're going to break down right here. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. To really get who the man is today, you have to understand the boy he was back in Madeira, Portugal. And trust me, his world was anything but glamorous. His life was a struggle from day one. Literally. His own mom, Maria Dolores, later admitted that because they were so poor, she actually considered not having him. Just think about that. His life started as a fight just to exist. So forget about privilege. Ronaldo's childhood was all about hardship. We're talking a house with a tin roof, sharing one room with his three siblings. His mom was working two jobs, a cook and a cleaner, just to keep them afloat. And his dad, who he loved, was struggling with alcoholism. This isn't the backstory you imagine for a superstar, right? It was a daily fight, plain and simple. And the doubts started early. Football was his escape, his one passion. But even there, people were critical. Teammates, coaches, they all looked at this scrawny kid and saw a weakness. They literally called him the noodle. Fast, yeah, but way too fragile. But someone saw something. At just 12 years old, Sporting Lisbon paid a record fee for him, 22,500 euros. Now, that might not sound like a lot today, but back then, for a 12-year-old kid who'd never even left his tiny island, it was a huge gamble. For the club, a big risk. But for Ronaldo, it was everything. It was his one shot. And so began the real test, moving from his home to the big city and having to face it all completely on his own. His teenage years weren't some highlight reel. They were just one crisis after another. At 12, he leaves his family. At 14, he gets expelled for throwing a chair at a teacher. At 15, he's diagnosed with a heart condition that could have ended his career right there. And then at 20, his father dies. Seriously, any one of those things would have been enough to break most people. And the loneliness? It was crushing. The scout who discovered him said he cried almost every day. The other kids in Lisbon made fun of his accent. His teachers just wrote him off, called him a lost cause, because all he cared about was football. Can you imagine the pressure to just pack it all in and go home? And then the ultimate test, a heart condition at 15 years old. The surgery, that wasn't just about fixing his body, it fixed his mindset. It was like he realized he'd been given a second chance. And from that point on, his body was sacred. Discipline wasn't just a good idea anymore. It was about survival. And here's the key thing, right? He didn't just survive all this stuff. He used it. He took all that pain, all the homesickness, all the doubt, and turned it into fuel. He was about to forge himself into a completely different person. And the transformation was, well, it was insane. His old teammate Gary Neville tells this great story. He said Ronaldo left for a tournament looking like a scrawny kid and came back looking like a middleweight boxer. And it wasn't just how he looked. His entire game went to another level. That so-called lost cause? Yeah, he was now on the path to becoming the best in the world. So what was the secret? It was a system. He built a system for greatness. And it's not about motivation, right? Because motivation comes and goes. It's about pure discipline. We're talking about a guy who would sneak into the gym at night, who would trick his coaches so he could do extra workouts. And it went beyond the gym. Fancy recovery methods, a super strict sleep schedule, and an insane commitment to his diet. No alcohol, no junk, nothing. And this right here, this quote gets to the heart of it all. He says, "I train my mind as much as my body." He figured out that our physical limits, they're usually just mental roadblocks we put up for ourselves. He wasn't just building a strong body, he was building an unstoppable mind. Because he knew the body will always do what the mind tells it to. So all this hard work, it didn't just make him a great soccer player. Oh no, it created a global phenomenon, something way bigger than the sport itself. He became more than Cristiano Ronaldo. He became CR7. And that's not just a cool nickname, right? It's a carefully built global brand. It's a symbol people recognize everywhere, and it stands for more than just soccer. It stands for discipline, for ambition, for success. And if you look at it from a marketing perspective, it's genius. Every piece of it is on purpose. His body, that sells fitness brands. His personality, that famous celebration, that's an iconic part of the culture. And his story, the kid who came from nothing, that inspires millions. It builds this deep connection that turns fans into customers for his hotels, his gyms, his clothing lines, the whole shebang. And the power of that CR7 brand is just mind-blowing. The guy has his own gravitational pull. His career moves can literally shift economies. Think about it. He goes to Juventus in Italy, and suddenly the whole league gets a massive boost in global attention. He moves to Saudi Arabia, and he becomes a centerpiece of the country's entire branding strategy. He doesn't just play in a league, he puts it on the map. Which brings us to this classic Ronaldo quote, "I don't chase records, records chase me." And that just sums it all up, doesn't it? He became so obsessed with the process, with the daily work, with the discipline, that becoming a legend wasn't the goal. It was just what happened along the way. So to wrap this all up, his story really leaves us with one big question. Look, talent is a gift, right? You're either born with it or you're not. But discipline, the choice to put in the work when nobody's watching, that's all on you. His entire life is proof of which of those two things really matters more in the long run. So the only question left is, which one is going to define you?